Welcome to the Becoming Evergreen podcast, a podcast for leaders who long to grow deeply, live purposefully, and lead from a place of rest. I'm Carissa Fleming.
And I am Debbie Burnett, and we are your hosts. Our goal is to create spaces where leaders can thrive in any season, rooted, resilient, and becoming evergreen.
Well, welcome back to Becoming Evergreen. Today we are talking about what it means to become evergreen and what that looks like in our daily lives. So, Debbie, can you talk to me a little bit about your daily life?
Yes,
what does your daily life look like?
My daily life is perfect, Carissa. There is nothing off with that. No. So my daily life, I live in Northern California. I live kind of in the coastal redwoods, and I am a corporate trainer up in Silicon Valley. And so for me, that actually looks like so some days I'm working at home, and then some days I'm on an event, emceeing something with 200 people. Sometimes more often than not, it's 50 people or 20 people. And then sometimes that involves travel. And so between that, and then I have family that's about an hour and a half away, kind of aging parents that I want to be present for, as well as family kind of spread out. And then very tight community in the area I'm in. I live near a retreat center, so I can literally walk down the street and go find coffee and people, which is helpful when you're working from home. So
And great when family comes to visit,
and
or
great when
Carissa
people like
comes for
Carissa.
family camp.
Yes, you were there last week, which was great.
Yes.
So my context is just the movement of trying to juggle a few things and the pros and cons of that. And then I think my suitcase kind of lives on my chair as well.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be more diligent, of course, to not travel as much with my free time, but at the same time, I love travel. So that's my context. I am a single professional. I don't know if I can say young professional, but I'll just say professional.
Professional.
We're just professional. Oh, thanks. So that's me. But I think between Carissa and I feel like we cover the human experience very well of any listener that's here. So what is your context?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am a mom of 3. I just celebrated our anniversary with my husband, Nate.
Yeah.
So I've got 3 kids. I've got 2 of mine. They go back and forth between their dad's house and my house weekly. And then I've got this amazing bonus 6-year-old. And he is just full of life and, oh my goodness, so much energy. Like at 6:30 a.m. when I'm trying to do my Bible reading, and he comes down, Mom, like, find me. Look at my most amazing hiding spot ever. And he's got all of these like nuggets piled up along the stairs, jumping, doing ninja course at 6:30 a.m. Yeah.
Yes. So he doesn't just wake up. He wakes up, and he's
he
like
wakes
all
up
on.
full of energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And then, I my background's in marketing. I've taken a brief hiatus, and that's kind of changing. I'm back doing some marketing projects again in the medical technology realm. But a lot of my days are spent driving to and from school, making dinner, and just managing the emotions that come with kids living in 2 homes, and trying to figure out how I feel, because, oh my gosh, like they take off and I miss them. Right. And little 6-year-old, he misses them. And so it's a lot. That's kind of like my daily life. And not to mention, like, I don't want to fail to mention that I had a skunk outside today during trash day, trying to figure out how to unload the trash cans. And the skunk is just like looking at me like, I'm your next pet. And I'm like, no, you are not my next pet. So it took me a little bit of time to jump on with Debbie this morning. But
and I don't think you want to wash your 2 dogs, because your 2 dogs who try to, befriend. The skunk. And
thankfully no befriending happened.
Well, and we joke that, like, we're talking about this context of daily life, and everything we just shared, skunk, kids waking up at the crack of dawn. It's like we have these really great intentions of all these things and rhythms that we want to do to steward our hearts and connect with God. But life is in the midst of it. And we want to talk about being resilient, and we want to talk about how we change. But if we don't talk about it in the context of life, then it's not going to connect. And just like if you were in a lab trying to do something versus out in the world, that we can map out this perfect plan, but when you watch Jesus and how he walked it out, he's doing it in the midst of ministry, people's demands in
Mm,
his life, the physical tiredness that comes uh, from doing a full-fledged ministry. He's doing it in the context of daily life, and we forget that
yes.
he, as fully man, fully God, he's modeling for us, though, as a human, how we can do this. And so there's a lot we can learn. And so we want to be students of this, which is why
Mm.
we are coming as fellow learners in this process. Um, Life is not perfect,
No, it's
which
not.
the skunk proved.
Yeah.
So, what, Carissa, would you say? Talk to us a little bit about just the human experience and how things were set up,
Yeah.
as we also lay the foundation.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. So,
Yeah,
I'm gonna just jump right into Genesis
yeah,
1:26 through 27, and then talk a little bit about why we're talking about it. So the scripture
yeah.
is, then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So I just want to say, like, we were created with intention to represent
Mhm,
God on the earth, but we also know that the story didn't stop there. Sin entered the world, and while
mhm.
Jesus made atonement for that sin, that doesn't mean that the struggle disappears. The struggle is real, as you heard a little bit about the skunk.
Hashtag.
Yeah, hashtag struggle. Um, but so Debbie and I, when we were really like, we've been sitting on this idea of becoming evergreen for a while. We did a little retreat to kick off and pray about what the Lord is doing and what he wants us to focus on. And I felt that the Lord gave us a clear picture of who this message is for.
Mhm,
For a while, we've been sitting on the big why, but it's starting to kind of take shape as a who. Um,
mhm.
and so who are we becoming? And ultimately, what does it mean to bear the image of Christ?
Yeah.
Um, and so I just, kind of want to focus there. And Debbie, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and just the who, again, really comes down to, yeah, like when you said, who are we becoming? I feel like it always comes down to, are we becoming people of love? It feels like kind of one of those core things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But,
Yeah.
um, loving God, loving others, I feel like that's one of our litmus tests. I'm like, when I'm not
Yeah.
being loving,
Yeah.
I need some transformation. So,
Yeah. And I think that feeling of love, right, often stems from, like, are we being, are we filling, are we being filled up, right,
yeah,
with the love of Jesus Christ? And
yeah.
that comes back to that idea of becoming evergreen, that if we're not spending the time that is needed to be filled, it's really
Hmm.
hard to feel loved, to feel loving. Um, and so when we did our little retreat, we were praying, we
Yeah,
were worshiping. I got this picture of a woman who was weighed down. Just
yeah,
kind of literally felt like her shoulders were hunched.
yeah,
They were weighed down by family, work, expectation, and this like relentless pressure of culture.
yeah.
Living in Southern California,
Mhm.
there's whole shows about it, but there's this unspoken and sometimes spoken message
Yeah,
that you have to look perfect. You have to act
yeah.
like you've got it all together. You have to drive the right car, live in the right
Mhm,
neighborhood, and all of these external pressures, they can
mhm.
fuel that desire. And I feel it. There's definitely
Yeah,
times where I feel this desire to conform. I want to be just like person next door. But as Christians, that's not what God has called us to.
yeah.
Um, he gave us a picture of how we should live. And so that's one of the things we want to focus on here. And I don't know, Debbie, how is that for you? I mean, you're constantly working in the Silicon Valley type of world in the
Yes.
Bay Area, and you're traveling, and I'm sure that looks different for you as well.
Yeah, and it's funny because Northern California, there's maybe a little less pressure on image, as in, I can definitely live in Patagonia, which actually there's its own thing.
Very comfortable and
It's like
wonderful.
it's like
Yeah.
comfortable and outdoorsy, but then it's Patagonia, which is not cheap.
Mm,
So we kind of have this joke around like that's your uniform. And then when you walk into Silicon Valley, I could be wearing a t-shirt and I'd be right there with them. So there's its own feel of just this innovative, um, creative environment and very diverse, kind of wonderful group. But there are pressures, and I feel like financial or um, there's even just like a movement from like every 3 years finding a better job, just kind of always trying to find ways
mhm.
to move forward. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's similar, but it has its own feel.
Yeah.
especially kind of in the Silicon Valley world. And I also have surf culture near me too. So that
Yes, you
has its
do.
own funny,
Mhm.
like outdoorsy play,
Yeah.
Peter Pan vacation. Like
Yeah.
there's its own feel to that, even
Yeah.
within like the good life, what that means.
Yeah.
And sometimes the lie of the good life, where it's like distract yourself to death in a
Yes.
way. And
Yes.
so that, and I know you've got that too where you are, but it
Yeah.
has its own piece to that that's easy to
Mm.
want to conform to. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, I mean, when we think about like so contrast of conforming, what does it look like to live? I mean, we're literally given that picture. And so in Romans 12, 1 through 2, it says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to represent your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be
Mhm.
transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And I think it's important to take a look at our own heart and but just like really to evaluate, like, does my heart and life really look like that picture God really through Paul gives us in that verse? Am I being transformed? And
Yeah,
I'm not just talking about when I was a young or a new believer. I'm talking about my 40-something-year-old self. I've been walking with Jesus truly for most of my life. I remember, giving my life to Jesus as a 3-year-old, but obviously that looks different through the seasons. I
yeah.
don't have it figured out. And you could just ask my
Really?
teenage daughter, right? She'll tell you, I don't have it figured out. We're all still growing. And, there's a striving that I think that can come into play, and it can be
Mhm.
exhausting.
Yeah.
But I think Jesus offers a different way. Debbie, you want to talk about that?
So when I think about striving, this constant striving that we talked about, and some of the context and the pressures, it's exhausting. And whatever your family of origin was, with I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist. That this for me has been somewhat of an Achilles heel, and like learning and unlearning this has been the journey of a lifetime. And the
Mm,
beauty is Jesus offers a different way. Um,
yeah.
Matthew 11:28-30 has just been a huge key verse for us. So the Matthew 11:28-30 says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And then we know we talked about that last week, that
Yeah.
that yoke is not just the imagery around oxen. It's the yoke is what they would call the teachings of a rabbi. And so the teachings, Jesus's way of doing things, his mode of operating, um, was easy and light. Which is counterintuitive to the heavy pressures of outward society. So when we talk about becoming evergreen, coming back to that, it's basically, how do we return to who we were created to be, that imago Dei, that we had this original design, and we're in the context of daily life. How do we grow into people who reflect Christ, which comes down to, are we people of love? Do we love him? Do we love others? Um, and we are a person with a heart and our own will. And we are a person who has thoughts and feelings and their mind. And then we have a body. So we're going to talk about that in the context of all of those things. Basically, transformation
Yeah.
is holistic.
Yes.
Um, so that core question might not be something you think about daily in the morning, but basically, how do we change? How do we grow? I had the privilege of studying this at Wheaton College, and it felt like, especially when you're in class, like this is the question, like the question.
Mm,
How do we change? So, just in Christian circles, we often default to this idea that growth is about trying really hard. If I go to church, if I read my Bible, if I tithe, if I don't kill anyone, we try to keep that bar nice and low there. I should be a transformed person, right? I kid a little bit, but that is something that I have thought. While those things are all good, it ignores one of the most important things, that how our thoughts and emotions and even motives come into play. How are things set up to work? Are we doing things out of love, or just doing it because we feel guilty? Because motives, I could be doing the right things, but I myself am not actually transformed. I might be doing it just to look good in Christian
hmm.
circles. True transformation, what the Bible calls spiritual formation, is, I like to say, it's more about training than trying. Because what we do does matter, but there's there's a way that it can transform. So yeah, when we are trying to change, we find that willpower only goes so far. It's interesting to think about willpower as actually a finite resource. We only have so much. And so as we build habits, it's finding ways to change that. That way we're not depleting this resource of willpower.
Yeah.
If you've ever read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, he talks about that of trying to automate things, build habits, so that way you're not always kind of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and white knuckling it. So, Carissa, you are an athlete. You've done volleyball over the years. You've coached soccer with your kiddos. What are some of the
Yeah.
things you find just as you watch this training process when you're watching athletes or were one yourself? I should
Hmm.
say, are one yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when I think about like athletics and training and
Hmm.
using my will, you can want to be the best athlete. You can have this strong desire to, you know, to to do really well. But if you're not training, if you're not
Hmm.
working towards something, and committing yourself really daily to it, you're going to see losses. You're going to see even the best of us. I mean, people lose in general, but when I think back about like my college years, right?
Hmm.
I'll never forget showing up my
Yeah.
first year in college, and we had to go do all these running exercises. And I was a volleyball player, and I'm like, wait a second, I didn't train for this, right? And actually, what I learned was, it was really important that I had like holistically trained as
Yeah.
well, where I was able to do the long and the short because you never know when you're going to hit that 5 game match, and your body really needs to. You don't want to be gassed in the end of the fourth game if you've got game
Yeah.
number 5 happening. Um, and I think I also want to say, though, that it doesn't necessarily get easier as you get older, right? Like we build these muscles and then we have constant changing in our lives. And so we have to rebuild them. Even though I've spent years being in shape, being a college athlete, coaching, that kind of thing, I think there's seasons where there's difficulties that come into play.
Yeah.
Um, you know, the last 2 years have been one where like, oh my goodness, I've got to kind of refocus, reestablish those habits like you were talking about, like James Clear was talking about. Um, Needing to, this summer, I'm like, how in the world am I going to maintain my workout schedule? How am I going to stay in shape, when I'm driving to and from kids, picking kids up? So I've been getting up at like 5:45 and going and working out 2 to 3 times a week, just so that I'm working on establishing those habits now.
Yeah.
Um, Rather than waiting till school starts, because I really want to be able to, I'm doing more work than I was doing 4 or 5 months ago. And so I'm like, I've got to really be available. And so setting those habits up, making sure that I'm really preparing myself for this race that I'm running, right? Not a sprint. So Debbie, that's a little bit about my daily, struggle, as an athlete, what it looked like then and what it looks like now. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
What is it for you? Talk to me about your, striving or not striving.
Yes. Yeah. When I think about, yeah, again, training versus trying, it's funny. I would never call myself a runner, but there's been some different times throughout my life where I've trained for a half marathon. I'm pretty consistently doing 5Ks or 10Ks. And it's really funny because one of the things that I find is I'll set these goals and I'm socially motivated in my training. So having people to train
I
with
get
or a
that.
race
Yeah.
to go to for me is very helpful. So, but I consistently sign up for these 10Ks where I don't really train. You can get by with it in your 20s, maybe even in your 30s, but with a 5K you can kind of get away with 3 miles of not
Hmm.
training, but not so much with 6. And so I'll do these races and I actually have one coming up in 3 weeks here in Santa Cruz. That's a 10K. This one I have actually trained for though. Um,
Yes.
and while I don't think I'm going to, swimmingly run 6 miles, I'm way better than I normally have. And basically, like, if I try this without actually training, the race day is fine, but then I'm either sore, injured, or I'm just not actually able to run the whole race. And for me, this really connects with spiritual formation. I even thought
Hmm.
about this when I was training for my half marathon. Is there's so many things in the mental side, in the body side, in the fueling that tie in with spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
And like for example, say I was going to try to run even a marathon, you're not going to walk in thinking, I got this. I'm going to learn everything I can about marathon running. I'm going to read all the books. I'm going to interview a few folks to hear about their experiences. And then I'm going to show up on race day and run. Nobody would advise that. It's like
Right.
basically you're setting yourself up to
I
fail.
may know somebody who's
Yeah.
tried it,
Oh, yeah. I'm
but
sure someone's tried
not
it.
well, right?
No. But how often do we do that in our spiritual life? Like, I don't know, some of
Mm,
those, what I call like your functional beliefs, like what you believe in your gut, but your head is like, no, that's not how it works. But we sometimes will think that if I know all these things about scripture, if I know all these things about life, like I'm good, I'll be changed. But it's in the actual practices and the things that involve your mind and heart and body that you change. And so in the same way
mm,
with marathon running, there's the mental game side of it of just hey, you're on mile 20 almost said 27. You're on mile 25. And there's a mental side to that. And then there's a fueling. Do you have your electrolytes with you? Do you have your quick sugars? Do you have those with you in order to fuel your muscles? Are you drinking enough water so you don't cramp? Do you
mhm.
have your running playlist that has a nice cadence? I had a lot of Michael
Yeah.
Jackson on mine. There's like a really good
Didn't
pace.
know that about you.
Yeah, I was like, I think there was just like something about, Smooth Criminal or some of
Yeah.
those with the pace that really helped. And you can see that there, but when we go into spiritual formation, we have these funny beliefs about how it works that is counterintuitive to the way it was set up.
Yeah.
What are some of those functional beliefs you run into, Carissa, of like where you've noticed, oh, I think it works this way? Uh,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
something you said kind of struck me. I was thinking about, you said you were talking about how you know scripture
yeah,
but if you're not digesting it
yeah,
daily, right? I
yeah,
was thinking about sometimes my kids will say, well, Mom, I already heard all those stories before talking
yeah,
about the Bible stories that
yeah,
they've learned in Sunday school. But actually, those stories aren't just meant to be learned once, right?
right.
Unless we're actually digesting them and learning about them, we can know but we won't really have actually internalized what's the message here and what's the
Yeah,
message for me today, not
yeah,
maybe what it was, when I was 5 or 6 and I learned the first time, because
yeah,
you really won't be able to grow if you there's these limiting beliefs, right? I already know this. I
yeah,
don't need to do
yeah,
it again. Or I
yeah.
already know how to run. I knew how to work out when I was 25 or when I was 35, but oh my goodness,
Mhm.
it really looks different,
Yeah,
on this side of 40. And so I think it's not just about learning how to run or how to, play volleyball or lift weights again, but it's really about becoming someone who does those things. It's about transformation from the inside out. There's that, like you were talking about, internal willpower.
yeah,
And that kind of starts the process as we've got this desire, but we really have to take the next step and focus on, okay, did I set my alarm? Am I going to
yeah,
get up? What's the time that I've scheduled to do this? Building in some of these practical rhythms
yeah,
is kind of what we're talking about, not just on a training side, but on a daily practice side. And who, like you said, community, who are the people that I'm drawing in so that I can make sure that I actually set and achieve some of these things, these goals. And it's not just about achieving goals or setting goals, it's really about becoming who you want to be, becoming not just who you want to be, but actually who Christ has called you to be. Again, back to that, being an image bearer of Christ. Who
yeah,
are we each in Christ? And what are the specific things He's put out for us to do? I tell my kids, God has created you with a purpose. He's got
yeah,
big plans for you. And I kind of want to say that to everybody here. He has literally created you for a purpose, even though maybe what you're going through right now is something that feels insurmountable. And I think
yeah,
we've walked through those. I've walked through the things
yeah,
that I didn't think that I would, I didn't know that how I would ever get through the hard things I went through. And actually I did. It was one step at a time. And it
yeah,
was open hands and humility and reading so many Psalms. Um, and so talking about that whole person, heart, mind, and body, I think is kind
yeah,
of where we're headed.
yeah,
We're talking about the willpower, but we're actually talking about becoming evergreen. And what does that mean? And we've talked a little bit about the why. And if you're listening, you're the who, because none of us are finished, right? One of my friends, good friends, Karen Bergstrom, often says, none of us are finished,
yeah,
right? We're all in process, until the day that we die, right?
yeah,
And that's kind of the end. And we're not trying to finish ourselves right now because, gosh, I don't want to be finished when I'm 65 or 85.
yeah,
I want to make sure that I am continuing to become evergreen in that desire where I'm connected and
Yeah.
I'm rooted, and I've got streams of flowing water next to
Yeah.
me so that I'm refreshed and replenished.
So, just a couple reflection questions to close
Yeah.
with. Just as we're listening, we're talking transformation. Take a moment, take a deep breath, and just pause and think about, hey, what's my context? And as
Hmm.
you look at some of those moments of being tempted to strive and kind of how you've navigated those daily rhythms, what's worked? What hasn't worked? Take a moment to pause and think about what have been those daily habits that have really worked for you. And just as we think about transformation, the invitation is that there is a way this works that will be easy and light. Take a deep breath, and that idea of striving is not how it's meant to feel or be. There's another way. And so, if any part of your heart is just taking a deep breath of relief right now, lean into that, because this striving and all the context around us, that's the world. And then the renewing of your mind, there's an invitation there that we have a fresh opportunity every morning to reform our thoughts, to center on God and to become a person of love. And if there's moments where you look and went, wow, I yelled at my kids, or I got super impatient, there is a new morning. Mercies are made new every morning. So lean into that invitation, take the relief that there's another way. And we'll see you next week when we talk a little bit more about our whole person transformation and how that's set up. Any final thoughts, Carissa, as we close out?
You were created for purpose. God's got a plan for you. And I'm excited to be journeying along with you, Debbie, and along with all of our listeners.
Yeah. All
Okay.
right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on the Becoming Evergreen journey. If this episode resonated, hit subscribe, share it with a friend, or visit becomingevergreen.com for more info.
Remember, lasting growth doesn't happen overnight. Stay rooted, stay present, and keep becoming evergreen.